Thank you, Jennifer. Right. So I've got a few slides here. I really want to talk, and there's been a lot of generalizations talked about travel plans, so I was going to really just focus on perhaps one or two examples of the work that I've been involved in, and just give one or two perspectives of my own view of how we get travel plans to work. And thanks to Frito, actually, Vipre has its roots at a Dutch organization, so I won't try and pronounce the acronym that it stands for and embarrass myself. But we've been around for, as a whole, about 60 years and implementing travel plans in the UK for about 15 years. We started the first formal TMA in Scotland, but in the main, we've been working with some of the larger organizations, household names that you'll see on there, on a consistent basis in trying to implement some of the very difficult policies that they're trying to involve. I think the perspective, well, I talked to Lisa about the sort of discussions that are going on today, and really I wanted to give a slightly different viewpoint, which was, in my own view and my own background, which is coming from a commercial background. I wanted to see that travel plans and view them as a product, as something that actually needs to be sold to its customers perhaps being the employees of an organization or employees of organizations that work within a business park, but taking quite a clear view of how do we sell the things that are involved in our travel plan to that audience. And a major issue that we've already addressed is that that's actually quite a complex thing to try and do, because we've got a very wide customer base. If you talk about one organization, you've got people who perhaps involved in the sales side of the organization or the support side of the organization. In a business park, you've got lots of different sorts of companies. You're trying to sell a wide range of things. You're trying to sell perhaps carpooling, lift sharing, cycling, walking, use of public transport. You've got a lot of good things in your kit bag, but actually that makes it a complex thing to try and message over. You've got probably existing policies and lots of things that drive people's existing views and behavior about how they use those things. We often say if you've lived in your own house for more than 2 years, you probably think you know about how to get about in your local area. You probably don't, but you think you have. It's your perception that you understand everything there is to know about services in your area. And also environmental factors, which can be very difficult to change. You're working with your business park or your airport or whatever, where it is, you can't move it. And you probably can't suddenly put a new train line in next week, so you're stuck with those sort of things. So if you were selling a product, a household product, a cleaning product or a pair of shoes or whatever, your marketing people would look at the demographics of the people you're trying to sell to and try and segment it up. And we do that to a certain extent in perhaps the surveys, and I recognize I'm talking about a single organization perhaps here. But the people that work in there are of a different age. People at a different age will react differently to being asked to cycle or walk at night to go and get a late bus. It is a truth that actually gender does make a difference to your perceptions around danger, of course, and cycling, for example. Where you are in your life stage, have you got kids or not? All these factors have an impact. Where you live is clearly important. We know mapping helps with that. Your previous experiences of getting on a bus which was late and dirty, or your previous experience with cycling which was poor, your financial standing, maybe you really don't need to take anything else than a taxi every day, and why should you? And your own environmental views are really important as well, as how open you are to accepting new things. So all of those are actually influencing factors in terms of when you see the marketing poster that we put about, what you actually think about that and whether you actually take notice of that. And if you're able to focus in on some of those factors with the people you're trying to talk to, then you can have more impact, is what I'm saying. The last thing really in terms of the travel plan network, which is the focus of today's session in this project, is that can be both a benefit and can make things harder for you, in my view, because you've got a larger customer base, and some of the products that we talk about need larger numbers of customers for them to work. And of course, the more organizations you've got to deal with, the more complex it is to actually talk to those customers. We were talking about the airports earlier and how you actually get to communicate with employees when you can't actually have access to their front door because they're airside and you're not allowed to get there. So it brings its own sets of complexities, which I haven't got time to go into all about now. So really my approach to behaviour change is really, what I'm saying here, one approach is being customer-led, and to say, well, let's take a product and let's take a segment of people in our organisation and let's look at what we can do for them. So for example, from the survey work, we might say, let's take everybody who drives who's in 4 kilometres of the workplace, which is probably very easy to do from survey data, and then look at that segment of individuals and what they could or would potentially use. And for example, they could be in cycling range. 4 kilometres, generally speaking, people could cycle some of the time. And then say, well, actually, how many people, given that we now know there are people who could cycle, how many of them do you think we could get to cycle and how often? And that's a judgment based on experience, perhaps. And then how do we modify the offer to get people cycling for that segment? So clearly, there needs to be showers and lockers and cycle paths and documentation, but how do we actually modify those messages to those people and access them? And how do we deliver that through the right sort of materials and a centralized service? So this is actually a real example we did with a large organization, and we said what we need is a strategy. Rather than just saying, let's do some cycling posters and stick them up and see who starts cycling, let's actually have a proper strategy and approach to do that. And that first one really was built around how do we get, in fact this example was built around the constraint of car parking. So there wasn't enough car parking spaces for everybody. So how do we release that issue? And the first one was actually how many people don't need to travel. There's a teleworking opportunity in this organization. And so if we can take out a number of people who actually don't need to travel at all, that's obviously the best thing possible. So there was a separate piece of work around getting people to telework. And then you're left with people who do need to travel to the organisation. So what policies do we put in place to actually help push or nudge those towards alternatives, of which a number of those probably could take public transport, and there was work done behind the scenes to work out where everybody lived and how close they were to bus stops and train stations and all that good stuff. So there was a number of things we did around getting people to use more public transport, which took another load of people out of the equation. We then left people who actually had to drive for various reasons, and we said, okay, so there's a carpooling opportunity for those. So let's put in place and assume how many people we could take out of carpooling. And then we're left with, at the end of the day, people that we felt would always drive, and there's nothing actually that TravelPlan could do about those. And let's see how that matches up to, in their case, car parking capacity, and see where the strategy left us. And we created what we called was travel planning Sudoku, which is a lot of numbers, but essentially is trying to put a little bit of science onto it to say, here's an organisation that's got a set number of people. We've surveyed them. We know how their current travel habits are. That's pretty much a given. Our targets a year later is different. We have a travel change that we want to make, and actually, how are we going to try and match those people up, and how are we going to, what segments of people are we going to influence and change? And I don't propose to go through that slide in detail, but I guess what I was saying there is we actually sat down and put numbers against the number of people that we felt we could get to use public transport, that we felt could start carpooling. Because if you don't have targets, you're never going to actually try and reach anything. So we put pretty fixed targets in place to say this is what we're going to achieve, and we worked that target on the basis of targeting the people that are in that segment and what we felt we could do and how do we get them to do it. This is one slide that I always try to put in because in terms of how we implemented them, in terms of behaviour change, we felt there are always 4 factors that we've got to get right in our materials. One is you have to, if you're trying to change someone's behaviour from A to B, you have to provide the alternative clearly. There's no point in persuading people to cycle if there are no cycle routes, they haven't got a bike, or they can't actually have a shower when they get to work. Everyone will have a perception about what you're asking them to do. And so that perception, if you can identify it, can be addressed through the information that you provide. So if you don't provide information about people what you're trying to do, then you can't expect them to do it. And then lastly, if you give them the opportunity, you've covered off their fears, you give them information why on earth should they do it, why they're motivated to make that change. And that cause it could be financial, it could be for fashion reasons, it could be health. But if you're missing any of those 4 factors in what you're trying to do, I'm suggesting that that may be a point of difficulty. I won't go through all that, but having a focal point for that delivery is really important. And there's a commuter centre here at the business park, and I can't stress enough the need to have full-time dedicated focal points for delivering everything you're doing in a consistent brand, in a consistent way, in a consistent message with experienced people. And as often is a physical presence, a drop-in centre through all the materials that you're doing. If you haven't got that and there isn't the commitment to provide that, then again, the travel plan will probably just remain a document on a shelf. I just want to finish up with a little bit of a minor case study of Stansted, which is just down the road, not about 10 miles from here, which is engaged in a number of core activities as part of its need to develop and its need to cap parking, its need to cap CO2, its need to take care of the environment through dedicated resources. And Cass, I think, was going to be here today. She's not. Would be able to say a few more words about what's been going on at Stansted, but a significant change has been achieved in driving alone to the airport. Significant change in increased public transport, and I haven't got time to go into detail here, but it is a really good example, I think, of what can be achieved when there are real drivers necessitating the need for change, and some very strong policies that have been put in place to make it happen. And that is me. Thank you.